Okay, imagine this for a second. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., the place that's meant to be a symbol of stability, but it's suddenly caught up in this really alarming narrative.
Alarming is definitely the word.
Yeah, we're hearing about like skyrocketing murder rates, these rampant carjackings, often by armed teenagers, some apparently as young as 14.
It's quite shocking when you hear the ages involved.
Totally. And just in the last few weeks, the headlines have been intense. A former government staffer beaten up, a congressional intern tragically murdered. It really paints this picture of a city, well, in crisis.
Mm.
And it's prompted this extraordinary step from former President Trump declaring an emergency, moving to federalize the D.C. police, even deploying the National Guard.
Which is a huge move.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really confusing, frankly.
Yeah.
While some sources are screaming that this federal help is desperately needed,
Right.
local D.C. officials, they insist violent crime has actually dropped significantly.
So two completely opposite stories.
Precisely. So what on earth is really going on there? Are the streets safer, more dangerous? And what does this federal move actually mean for D.C.'s, its unique status?
Well, today we're diving into exactly that. This high-stakes showdown over safety and power in Washington, D.C., where these conflicting reports are painting such vastly different pictures of a city supposedly in crisis.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is really to try and cut through some of that noise. We'll unpack the sources you shared, look at these different crime narratives, the unprecedented federal intervention, and what it all means for how D.C. is governed.
The goal really is just to lay out what's being reported so you can form your own informed understanding.
Okay, so let's kick things off with the perspective that kind of lit the fuse for this federal intervention. What exactly are former President Trump and the D.C. Police Union saying? What's the narrative that led to this?
Well, the narrative is one of a city just spiraling, almost out of control. The descriptions in some sources are incredibly vivid.
Like, wait.
They paint D.C. as being overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs, and homeless people. It sounds almost apocalyptic.
Wow, that's strong language.
It is. And they argue it's not just talk. They point to stats and specific incidents. For example, D.C.'s 2024 murder rate reported at 27.54 per 100,000 people.
Okay.
And to give that context, sources describe it as higher than places like Bogota, Mexico City, even Paris, putting D.C. in the top 20% of the most dangerous cities in the world, according to that perspective.
That's a really startling comparison, especially for D.C. And what about the youth violence aspect? We hear so much about that. Is that a big part of their argument?
Oh, absolutely central. Yeah. The data they cite shows juvenile arrests climbing year after year since 2020. Over 2,000 arrests just in 2023 and 2024. And get this. In 2024, juveniles made up more than half, 51.8% of all robbery arrests.
More than half.
Yep. And for carjackings, it's even more dramatic. In 2025, almost 60% of suspects are juveniles, and 80% of those incidents committed by 14 to 17-year-olds.
That's staggering.
It is. And 70% of those young offenders were armed. They also highlight the human cost, mentioning specific cases like the beating of that former government staffer, Edward Korstein, by two 15-year-olds just recently.
Right, I read about that.
And the fatal shooting of the 21-year-old intern, Eric Tarpinian-Jackham, back in June. These stories really personalize the statistics,
Yeah, absolutely. It moves beyond just numbers. So, okay, that's the picture being painted. What about the police themselves, the ones on the street?
Well, the D.C. Police Union, representing over 3,000 officers, they say they completely agree that crime is out of control.
Okay, so they back that narrative.
They do. And they blame a lot of it on what they call a historic staffing crisis. They say over 600 officers have left the MPD since 2020. That's a 16% drop in their workforce.
Wow, that's a huge gap.
It means officers worked over 2 million extra hours last year just trying to cover shifts. And the union also brings up these really serious allegations of corruption within MPD leadership.
Corruption? Like what?
Claiming supervisors have manipulated crime statistics, basically cooked the books to make crime rates look lower than they are. They point to Commander Michael Pulliam being put on administrative leave back in May as supposedly linked to that.
So a department under huge strain and potentially internal issues with data. And who do the union and other critics blame for this whole situation?
They're pretty direct. Critics supporting the federal intervention point fingers squarely at soft-on-crime leaders and local Democrat-led policies.
Which policies specifically?
Things like cash bail elimination. They argue this lets accused individuals out of custody without posting money, creating a revolving door.
The idea being that people get arrested and are right back out.
That's the argument that dangerous criminals get released almost immediately and can repeatedly commit crimes again. The D.C. City Council also gets criticism, seen by some as anti-law enforcement, maybe supportive of defund the police. And there's a lot of frustration voiced about juvenile prosecution. The feeling is that even when young people commit serious violent crimes, they do not receive appropriate punishment and end up back on the streets too quickly.
So calls to get tougher on young offenders.
Exactly. Even calls to lower the age of responsibility. And one more thing they point to, a systemic issue, is the number of vacant judge positions. More than 20% on the Superior Court are empty, which they say slows down the whole justice process for both criminal and juvenile cases.
Okay, so that's a pretty damning picture from that side. Staffing shortages, data questions, problematic policies, slow justice system. It sounds quite dire.
It does. It paints a picture of systemic failure.
But then how do we square this with what the local officials are saying? Because their story is totally different.
Completely different. You have D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwalb and Mayor Muriel saying, no, actually, we've seen meaningful, significant drops in crime since 2023.
Significant drops. Based on what?
Based on the MPD's own public reports. As of mid-August 2025, they report a 26% drop in violent crime and a 7% drop in overall crime compared to last year.
26%. That's a big drop.
It is. And specifically, they highlight a 32% decrease in homicides in 2024, with projections for more drops this year. Mayor Bowser even said violent crime hit its lowest point in 30 years back in 2019, and that trend was continuing downwards.
Okay, wait. If the MPD's public data shows these big drops, how does that possibly line up with the police union saying crime is out of control and alleging data manipulation? Are there other sources we can look at, independent ones?
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, there are. Sources like the Council on Criminal Justice, FBI crime databases, even independent analysts like Jeff Asher, they all seem to confirm these broader crime reduction trends in D.C.
So external sources back up the idea that crime is generally going down citywide.
It appears so, based on those sources. Now, regarding the data manipulation claims, specifically about Commander Pulliam, those defending the local government call this a fallacy of composition. Their point is, okay, maybe there was an issue with one commander in one district.
Yeah.
D.C. has 7 police districts.
I see.
But even if that one case is true, they argue it doesn't erase the substantial citywide crime reductions that are documented by multiple independent sources.
So a localized problem, potentially, shouldn't be used to paint the entire city with the same brush.
That's the counter-argument. It's a really good reminder, actually, about how we interpret data. Always look at the scope, the source. One incident or one district doesn't automatically reflect the whole city's reality. Statistics can definitely be framed to support very different narratives.
That makes sense. It highlights just how complex this is. And this whole clash really throws DC's unique status into sharp relief, doesn't it? Let's dig into that. The legal side, the history. What actually allows the president to step in like this?
Yeah, it all comes down to D.C. not being a state. It's a federal district.
Yeah.
Fundamentally different. That means the U.S. Congress has ultimate authority over its governance.
Ultimate authority.
Pretty much. Now, Congress did grant D.C. limited home rule back in 1973 with the Home Rule Act. That gave the city its own council and mayor more local control.
Right.
But, and this is key, Congress kept significant power. Power over the budget and the power to override local laws passed by the D.C. Council.
Okay, so Congress holds the strings. How does the president fit into federalizing the police specifically?
That's also in the Home Rule Act. There's a specific provision allowing the president to federalize the MPD, the Metropolitan Police Department, under special circumstances if they declare an emergency.
And is that power checked at all? Can a judge step in?
Legal analysis mentioned in the sources from folks like Hans von Spakovsky suggests that power is extremely broad. It's entirely within the discretion of the president, and probably not something a judge could easily overturn. Plus, there's the National Guard aspect. The president is the direct commander of the D.C. National Guard, unlike in states where the governor usually commands the Guard.
So it's a much more direct line of command for the president in D.C.
Exactly. Makes deploying them logistically simpler for the federal government.
Now, D.C. officials called federalizing the MPD unprecedented. Is that accurate? Has this specific power ever been used before?
That seems to be accurate, yes. Attorney General Schwalb specifically said it's an unprecedented step in the 50-plus years of home rule. This particular provision, federalizing the MPD, apparently has never been invoked by a president before now.
Wow. First time ever.
Seems so. And Mayor Bowser often points this out. D.C.'s vulnerability, because it isn't a state, doesn't have senators to fight for it in Congress. It leaves the city open to this kind of federal intervention. It's a core part of the argument for D.C. statehood.
Right. Statehood is the ultimate protection. But despite those concerns about federal overreach, some people actually argue for more federal control, don't they?
They do. The argument there is basically that the city's perceived mismanagement, especially regarding crime, justifies it. Some even suggest Congress should give serious consideration to taking back over the local government entirely.
Taking back control completely.
That's the idea floated in some critiques. And they point to a recent example. Back in 2023, President Biden actually worked with Congress to override changes D.C. had made to its own criminal code.
Oh, right. I remember that.
So even under a different administration, it showed that Congress still has that power and is willing to use it, home rule or not.
It's clear this isn't just about crime stats in one city. It taps into much bigger policy debates, political fights, things that echo nationally. How does the D.C. situation play into those larger conversations?
Oh, it's a huge focal point. Take the criminal justice debates. Critics of D.C.'s local policies constantly bring up things like cash bail elimination as proof of failed liberal ideas, arguing it creates that revolving door.
Right.
They point to the high rate of juvenile involvement in serious crimes, those armed carjackings by teens, and argue that offenders aren't treated as violent adults and get back out too fast, which fuels calls to, lower the age of responsibility.
Get tougher, essentially.
And that issue of vacant judge seats, over 20% empty in D.C.'s Superior Court, that resonates nationally, too, as a criticism of the justice system's efficiency, or lack thereof. Critics say it slows everything down.
And beyond policy critiques, what about actual changes on the ground from this federal intervention? What's happening operationally?
Well, reports mention things like streamlining the process for concealed carry permits and firearm registration, apparently cutting the wait time from months to just 5 days.
Okay, faster gun permits. Anything else?
There's also the pledge from the Trump administration to remove homeless encampments from all over our parks, a very visible change.
But what's the pushback on that?
Critics argue just clearing encampments without providing real support services, housing, mental health care, job training, won't solve the underlying issues. They might also point to broader federal policies they claim have hurt social safety nets, suggesting it's contradictory.
Right, addressing the symptom but not the cause, potentially. And finally, how does all this D.C.-specific stuff get tangled up in the national political rhetoric? It feels like D.C. is often used as a political football.
Absolutely. It gets framed very heavily through partisan lenses. You hear claims like the left always sides with criminals, or, conversely, that the intervention is just authoritarian muscle meant to intimidate, silence dissent, maybe even a publicity stunt.
So standard political framing from both sides.
Pretty much. And there are even deeper, more complex debates that get linked in, especially from conservative sources. Things like census data, non-citizens, and how that affects congressional seats and the Electoral College.
How does that connect?
The argument is that counting non-citizens for representation twists and torts political representation, potentially giving states like California more seats than they would have based only on citizen population. And this ties back to D.C., because the D.C. City Council allows non-citizens to vote in local elections.
Ah, okay. So D.C.'s local policies become part of this bigger national debate about citizenship, voting, and representation.
Exactly. It just shows how D.C. ends up being this focal point for national debates on federal power, urban crime, judicial policy, political narratives, and the very nature of democratic governance.
Yeah.
It's way bigger than just the district itself.
Yeah, we've definitely seen how the crime situation in D.C. is viewed through such incredibly different lights. You've got the city out of control narrative versus the significant crime reduction argument.
Right.
And then layered on top is this extraordinary federal intervention, which just underscores that really unique, often tense, constitutional tightrope D.C. walks between local control and federal authority.
This deep dive really does put a spotlight on D.C.'s unique status, doesn't it?
Right.
And the inherent tension there. It leaves us with a pretty important question to think about, I think. Given this constant push and pull between local autonomy and federal oversight, what kinds of long-term solutions actually work for tackling urban crime? And maybe more fundamentally, how do we balance that federal power with the right to self-determination for the nearly 700,000 people who actually live in Washington, D.C.? What does it really mean for a city to be the nation's capital when its residents have less control over their own affairs than people in any state?